Boston Red Sox have won 6 in a row, 11-4 winners last night in the late game against Texas. Benintendi, phenomenal, 5 for 5, 2 home runs, 6 RBIs. Scott Lauber covers the Red Sox with ESPN.com, and he joins us here this morning on Big Board Sports 104.5, the Team ESPN Radio in Albany. Good morning, Scott Lauber. How are you, my man?
Good morning, Roger. How are you?
Been a while, buddy. I used to talk to you quite a bit back in the day.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, we had kind of a weekly thing. It was really nice.
Yeah, well, it's good to have you back in the mix. This is a new station within the last year for me, so good to have you on 104.5 at Team ESPN Radio. And boy, the Red Sox have put it together, haven't they, Scott? I mean, they really could not be playing much better than they are right now.
Yeah, you're right. These last 6 or 7 games are kind of what everyone expected, really. Right going into the season, they were the heavy favorite to win the AL East, and you looked at them and you said, look, it's got to start from the mound, and it has. As much as we want to talk about the run totals that they've been putting up, you look at a game like last night, they get 19 hits, they score 11 runs, but really, didn't it start with David Price, setting the tone with 6 scoreless innings? Maybe could have gone longer in that 7th if they hadn't had such a long inning the inning previous, and if they weren't as concerned as they are with making sure that blister and that split fingernail don't get any worse on his hand. So, he pitched so well last night. He kind of set the tone. Early in that game in the first inning, he could have gotten away from him. Texas had a couple of guys on with 2 out, and he gets out of that, and it allows everyone to sort of breathe out, settle down, and then the offense went to work. And, look, they're not going to go ahead and do what they did last night or do what they've done over the past 6 games all year long. It's unsustainable. But you did expect that they would score with more consistency than they have for the first couple of months of the season, and now they're sort of hitting their stride. They're realizing that they're not a home run hitting team. They're a team that scores in other ways, and I think they've sort of accepted that. They've sort of realized that, and they've sort of figured out a way to kind of keep the line moving, so to speak, and build rallies, and that's what they've done over the past week or so.
And you're right on the starting pitching, Scott, because to me, that's where it starts. We know what you're getting out of Chris Sale. He's been phenomenal, and Price has been, kind of a little bit of up and down in his Boston career so far. And then they get to the relationship that he's had with fans and maybe more importantly, the media. What is it with Price that has never been able to connect between, I don't know if it's you or whoever else is covering Price? There's been a lot of friction going on between the two sides. Where does that stand right now?
Yeah, we could do a whole show on it, Roger, a whole morning on it, and we probably still wouldn't get to the bottom of why and how and why he's sort of acted the way he has some of the time. And it's not I'd like to, I want to be careful on this. It's not a David Price versus the media thing. I don't think the general population really cares whether or not David Price gets along with, the people who cover the team. It's more, I wrote this yesterday, when you pick fights with Dennis Eckersley on the team plane or a beat writer in a clubhouse in New York, and you do it for what appears to be the reason of defending a teammate or teammates against criticism that you find or they found unfair, you put a target on yourself. It's possible that that teammates appreciate that. He's made a show of it as well. That teammates appreciate that they see that, and that they come to expect that he's going to do that. But when you make yourself sort of the sheriff, the policeman of the clubhouse, I call him the ombudsman of the Red Sox, and sort of the decider of what's fair and unfair in the media, and you put that on yourself, you also don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt anymore when it comes to having people defend you. So look, I think he thinks his intentions are good. He thinks he's defending his teammates, but maybe, as I said, Chris Sale has been so good about putting what he calls blinders on and sort of tuning out all the outside noise that comes with playing in Boston. And I think David Price might be wise to take a cue from him on that. It sort of eases the burden on you when you don't go ahead looking for fights.
I agree. And you know what? Worry about your pitching. You know what? Worry about going out there and getting the job done, because for not let's say the majority of the time, but he's not been great in Boston on the mound. I think the fans, I will say this, Scott, I think the fans have expected better out of David Price since he came over from Tampa.
Yeah, look, I think in some ways, and I sort of felt this last year, in some ways the expectations for David Price were unfair. He comes over with a humongous contract, $217 million. I think it's the most total money that a pitcher has ever received. Expectations were for him to go out there and throw a shutout every game, and that's not going to happen. By his own admission, though, he was not as consistent last year as he normally is. He had more stinkers than he's used to. He had more, sort of what you would call, I suppose, average starts than he was used to. And yet he still put together a run during the second half where he was among the best pitchers in the American League. Then he gets to the postseason, and obviously things don't go his way. He gets hit hard in Game 2 in Cleveland, and that's sort of the lasting impression that everyone is left with of David Price. And so, you can't have it both ways if you're David Price. You can't admit or acknowledge that you weren't as consistent as you wanted to be last year or you've been in your career, and then expect that no one is going to criticize you for it on the outside. So, look, he's 8 starts into his season after the elbow injury in spring training, and I think what you're seeing is a very, very good pitcher who's kind of finally sort of finding his stride 8 starts into his season. If you look at it, he made 2 rehab starts, and then got called up or got taken off the DL on Memorial Day in Chicago. And those first few starts were probably what would be the equivalent of spring training starts. You make 6 or 7 starts in spring training, and then you're ready for the season. Well, he made 2. And now he's 8 starts into it, and he looks a little bit more like he's sure of what he's doing out there, and his command has certainly come around. He's not walking anybody, which is what we've come to expect from him, and he looks much more like the pitcher that he truly is. And if that's what he worries about, if that's what he pays attention to, and that's pitching, he's going to be just fine.
ESPN.com, Scott Lauber with us here on 104.5 The Team, ESPN Radio. Scott, Chris Honorado up here with Rodger as well. Can you give us the pulse of this Boston Red Sox locker room and maybe even the fan base as to how far this pendulum may have swung? A slow start to the season, but now a 6-game winning streak and a 4-game lead in the AL East.
Yeah, I mean, look, they've been on the road now since Friday. And, I think from what I gather from people I talk to at home, Boston's pretty excited about Gordon Hayward in the last couple of days, and the fact that he's going to be a Celtic. And so I don't know. It's hard for me to know whether the Red Sox uptick has really sort of taken hold back home. I do know within the clubhouse that there's finally, I think, a feeling of now we're rolling. And David Price, interestingly enough, made a point last night after his start about how early in the season they called a team meeting, and they were about 4. He said they were, as he recalls, they were about 3 or 4 games over 500 at the time. And he said, it's the first time in my career that I've ever had a team meeting when we've been over 500. Normally you do that when you're on a losing streak or you're below 500 and you're really scuffling. And he said, I think that really sort of tells you what we expected of ourselves, that 3 or 4 games over 500 was not good enough. And now they're really sort of rolling. They've won 6 in a row. They've won 7 of 8. I think that the last 8 games they've outscored teams like 67-24 or something like that. They're really starting to kind of hit on all cylinders. And, I think that there's a feeling in the clubhouse like, okay, now we're rolling downhill. Now we're getting some momentum. Now we're going to start to pull away. And now we're playing like we expected to play all along. And you mentioned the lead over the Yankees is now 4 games. It's the largest it's been. I think that the Red Sox fully expect that it's going to continue to widen in the second half.
Yeah, I was going to say, we threw out the question to our Yankee nation here, and we are the home of Yankee baseball here, Scott, on 104.5 Team ESPN Radio. How much of a concern is there right now with the way this Yankee team is playing, and as good as Boston is playing? They better be careful. If you're the Yankees right now, Scott, do you think they need to be very careful here? They need to win some games, or this thing could really widen very, very quickly. It's already at 4 games, and it has the feel that it could balloon even further.
Yeah, and look, for me, the big difference between the Red Sox and the Yankees right from the jump was pitching, starting pitching, and I think that, I think the Yankees find themselves now in a position where they are a contender. They are, they certainly have a playoff caliber lineup. I felt that way actually from And when I saw them in April at Fenway Park, you said, wow, this lineup's better than maybe a lot of people gave it credit for. Now they're in a position where maybe they need to go out before the deadline and add a starting pitcher, somebody that they can sort of roll out there every fifth day and count on, along with Tanaka, along with Severino, along with Sabathia, along with the rest of that rotation to kind of really steady things a little bit and make things a little bit more stable. The Red Sox are in the odd position, I think, even among contenders, of not really needing to go out and get starting pitching. That's what everyone's looking for this time of year, and the Red Sox feel like their starting pitching is just fine. They need other things. They need a third baseman. They might need another relief pitcher. But, I think the Yankees are certainly going to be looking at it and saying, well, now it's 4 games. We're not playing very well. They're starting to roll. We got to sort of steady this thing. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves, 7 or 8 games out. And, with a number of games certainly left against the Red Sox this season, but a big hill to climb. And I think that they got to be a little bit careful, like you said, and a little bit mindful of the fact that, while they're not playing very well for the first time all year, the Red Sox are really starting to hit their stride.
Yeah, and Chris Sale's been as good as advertised, right? That no issues there.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah, he's really good.
He's really good. And it's so interesting because you've seen so many pitchers over the years, really good pitchers like David Price and Josh Beckett, come to Boston, and their first year there is not what they expect. They either underperform or maybe the fishbowl of Boston kind of gets to them a little bit. That has not happened at all. Chris Sale has been every bit as advertised, and maybe even better if that's possible. For me, he's the Cy Young frontrunner right now. For me, he's probably the All-Star Game starter. It's going to line up that way. He's going to pitch on Thursday, which would mean he can easily pitch on Tuesday and start that game in Miami. So he has been every bit as advertised, and if he gets that start on Tuesday night in Miami, it'll be well-deserved.
Scott, one question away from the current team. As you know, obviously the Red Sox retired David Ortiz's jersey. Is Ortiz a Hall of Famer? And I guess the more specific question should be, is he a first ballot Hall of Famer, or will voters need some time and convincing to put him in?
That's a great question, Chris. And I'm a voter, and, what I tell people, and it sounds like a cop-out, but, I don't mean it to sound that way, is that, I have time to decide.
Right.
He's not going to be on the ballot for 5 years, so I have time to decide. Now, I covered his last 7 years in Boston, and, my gut says, yes, he's a Hall of Famer. I feel like the things he did over those 7 years, if he wasn't the best hitter in baseball during that time, he was in the top handful. I do think there are a few hurdles that he's going to have to overcome in the minds of a lot of voters. One of them is the designated hitter. I vote for Edgar Martinez every year, but his candidacy has not, it's sort of stopped and started. He's had years where it feels like there's some momentum there, and then he's had years where he's taken a step back. So we're going to get to see now over the next 5 years how Edgar Martinez's candidacy evolves, and maybe that has an impact on David Ortiz's. If voters who've been hard-nosed on DHs come around on Edgar, they're going to come around on Ortiz. The other thing, of course, is going to be the question of his name popping up on the survey testing in 2003, the Times report in 2009 where his name was leaked. He's never explained that. He's never exactly provided a reason for why it happened. Rob Manfred, interestingly enough, last year at the end of the season kind of softened that a little bit by saying, well, there were a lot of false positives, and I can't say if David was or wasn't, but just know that there were a lot of guys who tested positive who would not be positive tests now based on what we saw then. I don't know what you want to read into that, but certainly voters are going to have to make up their minds on that as well. I can say this. Since testing was put in place, he never tested positive. And, and so I put some weight in that, some stock in that. So like I said, my initial gut says yes, but, we have 5 more years of kind of information gathering and sort of figuring out how this is going to go to see whether he's in fact a Hall of Famer and whether it happens on the first ballot. I think, at the very least, maybe he has to wait a little while, but, I personally think he should be there.
Scott Lauber, you're the man. When Chris Honorado said we got Scott Lauber coming on, I'm like, but that's a name. He used to write for the Boston Globe forever, right? Globe, wasn't that it for many years? Huh?
Boston Herald, yeah.
Boston
Yes,
Herald,
Boston
Herald, not Globe, Herald, not Globe. But I remember having you on. I said, boy, he is really good. And now you reaffirmed that this morning. Thanks for a few minutes, Scott. And now that we know how to get back in touch, guaranteed when we're talking Red Sox, you'll hear from us again.
Awesome, guys. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Scott.